Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily News. I'm Nicholas Richardson. A Russian intercontinental ballistic missile was fired at Ukraine, Ukrainian politicians say, and show photos of parts of it as proof. The United States is verifying this information, and Russia has banned officials from making any comments. The fact is that a missile of a new type, which the Kremlin has not used before, fell on the Dnieper River this morning. According to analysts, this is another step in the escalation of the conflict and an examination of the West's response to Russia's threats.
One doesn't have to be a military expert to see that this is something the world hasn't seen before. There was speculation yesterday that the Russians may be preparing a new type of missile with a much higher yield. Moves by US diplomats in Kyiv to close the embassy, among other things, showed that they may have known about the threat in advance. Today, a new Russian missile hit. All the characteristics, speed, altitude, prove that it was an intercontinental ballistic missile. An investigation is underway. It is clear that Putin is using Ukraine as a testing ground. As it turns out, the damage in Dnipro, according to initial reports, is relatively minor, or at least not what one would expect from the impact of this type of missile. This is a weapon designed for one thing and one thing only: the mass destruction of the enemy with nuclear warheads. No one in the world has ever thought of adapting this type of weapon for conventional warfare, that is, for destroying ground targets with conventional warheads. It is likely that the Kremlin informed both Washington and Beijing through diplomatic channels of the planned attack with such a missile. The launch and trajectory were certainly seen by all military radars and satellites. However, the point was not the attack itself, but its implications. What we have here is a clear strategic signal that the Russians are prepared to use nuclear weapons. This is the first bombardment of a neighboring country with an intercontinental ballistic missile. The Kremlin is escalating for obvious reasons. Negotiations on a possible end to the war are likely soon. The whole sequence of events in recent days clearly shows that Moscow is trying to make plays in its geopolitical chess game. North Korea's entry into the war, Russia's change in nuclear doctrine, threats to anti-missile installations in Poland and Romania, and finally, the latest incident in the Baltic Sea. According to unofficial information from Western media, the captain of the Chinese ship that allegedly damaged underwater transmission cables is a Russian. After all, it is no secret that the Danish Navy has been tracking the ships, so it is clear that the relevant Danish authorities are involved in this matter. In addition, the Kremlin is returning to its tactic of attacking critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Massive power outages, heating, and water shortages are a certainty. I am worried about the power outages. I won't be able to cook food because I have an electric stove at home. But otherwise, we are prepared. We have a camping stove, a generator, power banks. Putin has one goal: to weaken Ukrainian morale as much as possible, to scare people into negotiating on his terms at all costs. At the moment, we see what he is doing, targeting civilian targets, apartment blocks. It's all about creating fatigue. It's all about creating discontent among the citizens of Ukraine, and probably some of the soldiers as well. Paradoxically, however, the more brutal Putin's tactics are, the more Ukrainians want to continue the fight, because it is clear that agreeing to make concessions to the Kremlin would mean Ukraine falling back into the suffocating gray bog of the Russian sphere of influence, a fate no one looks forward to.
The proposal to reduce the Social Security health contribution, which will translate directly into a loss of revenue, overlaps with the growing hole in the Polish National Health Fund. Outrage has been caused by the mode of the introduction of this change without public consultation for reasons of emergency. Add to this the growing debt of hospitals, no money in the National Health Fund, and the record budget deficit, and the question remains open as to why this is an insufficient reason to dismiss the health minister. The opposition's motion on this matter was rejected earlier today.
Ponad 20 miliardów złotych.
The debt of hospitals is already more than 20 billion zloty, and it is steadily increasing at the National Health Fund. And it may be even higher as a result of the government's proposed reduction in health premiums. Today, I take a closer look at the situation. The goal was laudable, to relieve entrepreneurs and, as if by magic, heal healthcare finances. Back in May of this year, the Polish health minister was full of optimism.
Cel mamy wspólny.
We have a common goal. We want the highest possible quality of healthcare with the lowest possible tax tributes. After months of postponing the introduction of a reduction in the health premium, a proposal was made today.
Pierwszy projekt
The first contains changes that will come into effect. At the same time, in 2025, we propose to reduce the minimum contribution for entrepreneurs according to the tax scale, flat tax or tax card. So much so that there are already calculations showing that 131,000 companies will lose instead of gain. Some of them will face a gigantic increase in health premiums instead of the promised reduction. The changes are unfavourable to those who settle their taxes with a flat rate.
Ponieważ to, co dzisiaj jest proponowane przez rząd,
What is being proposed today is neither fulfilling a promise nor meeting the expectations of entrepreneurs. The drafts have not been subjected to public consultation, so the government is aware that the bill does not meet expectations. Polish entrepreneurs are indeed not happy with the proposed changes, and they resent that no one consulted them. The government explains that the draft was presented as a matter of urgency. MPs should deal with the project that restores the flat rate health contribution for entrepreneurs as promised during the election campaign. Then what is the goal of the duo of health and finance ministers now that neither entrepreneurs are satisfied and the debt in the National Health Fund will increase even more? The finance minister has a plan.
proponowane zmiany
The proposed changes will not affect the National Health Fund. They will be fully covered by the state budget. How much will have to be added?
Mamy deficyt w budżecie państwa, który
We have a deficit in the state budget which has increased to 240 billion zloty, while it turns out that there is no money with which the NFZ budget could possibly be supplemented. And in fact, these amounts quoted oscillate from 10, 15 or even 18 billion zloty. From the calculations provided by the government, it appears that the changes will mean a reduction in budget revenues of up to 6 billion zloty. There is no information on how the amended budget with a record deficit is yet to cover the cost of implementing the changes in health premiums.
Niestety te zmiany.
Well, this will further increase the budget hole, and the ones who will lose out the most are those who pay tax on a linear basis. Those are freelancers, doctors, dentists. So taxpayers will end up paying for the changes in taxes anyway. The opposition's motion to dismiss Izabela Leszczyna as health minister was, according to the parliamentary arithmetic, rejected. Yesterday in London, 10,000 farmers and hundreds of tractors protested against the introduction of a new inheritance tax. TV presenter Jeremy Clarkson stood up for farmers' interests. His involvement in the protests is viewed positively by the British media. Moreover, they compare him to Donald Trump. This in turn paves the way for a political reshuffling in England.
The new tax introduced by the left-wing British government is expected to hurt all farmers, but the owners of the largest farms will be hit the hardest. Heirs will pay 20% of the value of inherited property. The protesting farmers were joined by popular TV presenter Jeremy Clarkson.
This is where the food comes from. Yeah. If the government ends farming.
The effects of government policy could be disastrous, seizing unprofitable farms and building wind farms in their place.
Well, the vast majority of farms will not be affected. The data from HMRC is actual data from the last year that we actually have real data available, projected forwards. It shows that no more than around 500 farms would be affected.
Clarkson understands these problems well, and his views speak directly to the needs of the right-wing electorate.
A lot more impactful things. I think farmers can do better than that. I've got some ideas.
The British Daily Telegraph sees similarities between the TV star and U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Why Jeremy Clarkson could be Britain's Donald Trump? In another article, the paper says Jeremy Clarkson's growing popularity could sink the Labour government and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Paradoxically, after Brexit, the UK has gone even further in pursuing the leftist agenda, the social agenda, the social change agenda, and finally the climate agenda. And now what we have is a fight against farmers. A resistance movement is necessary, and Jeremy Clarkson is one person who represents such a resistance movement. The Labour Party is losing support in the polls. So far, their energy and climate goals have been in line with those of the U.S. As long as the Democrats were in charge. Under Donald Trump, American industry is expected to take a different direction. The question is how the British market will react. Interestingly, a well-known British car brand, Jaguar, intends to produce only electric cars and is launching a new marketing campaign. The launch of the campaign was met with a wave of criticism in the media. Do you sell cars? Jaguar is a brand with more than 100 years of tradition, but in its new commercial, the theme of cars was completely ignored. Instead, it explored themes of gender identity, multiculturalism, and LGBT ideology. This is a stark example of how ideologization has reached all areas of life in the British Isles. The marketing campaigns of well-known brands in certain countries are carried out in accordance with the political goals of those in power. Jaguar's commercial is in line with the Labour Party's program. On the other hand, since Donald Trump's victory in the U.S., the aerospace conglomerate Boeing has already gotten rid of its entire diversity department, which favored minorities among its employees, especially African Americans or those who identify themselves as part of the LGBT community. It's also a broader example of how Jaguar fits into what has been supported, advertised, and promoted in the UK so far, in ways that we may not yet know, and hopefully will never know. Campaigns like this one by Jaguar show that large corporations are behind the shaping of public opinion, often in areas that have nothing to do with the company's business. The intense promotion of LGBT ideology and cultural correctness, on the other hand, is an obvious attempt to set a new standard of normalcy. Interestingly, on Monday, Victoria Kjær from Denmark won the Miss Universe 2024 pageant. Her victory came as a surprise to many because she is a white, heterosexual, biological woman. Previous editions of the pageant have established a new canon of beauty based on diversity. In short, minority women, including even transgender people, were more likely to win. We have seen in the Western world and in the United Kingdom that for years there's a strong correlation between big capital and leftist ideologies, people who portray themselves as some kind of revolutionaries, who are oppressed minorities or represent them, in fact enjoy the sympathy and massive multi-billion-dollar support of the world's largest, most powerful, and wealthiest companies. The rise in popularity of Donald Trump and his victory in the last election, as well as the example of Jeremy Clarkson, show that conservative values are still in high demand. However, whether these values will be swept away or not depends on us.
The International Criminal Court in The Hague has issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister, the country's former defense minister, and a Hamas leader. Prosecutors accuse them of intentionally targeting civilians and responsibility for crimes committed with others. The request for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant and Mohammed Deif was filed by a Hague prosecutor in May of this year. The verdict was condemned by Israel and the United States. Neither country is a member of the court. Washington stressed Israel's right to defend itself against terrorist attacks. Hamas also disagrees with the warrant, although in Deif's case, an arrest may simply be impossible, as he was supposed to have been killed in one of Israel's airstrikes. An arrest warrant could complicate already difficult attempts to bring an end to the war in the Middle East. Some International Criminal Court member countries, including the Netherlands, have already declared that they will detain the Israeli Prime Minister if he appears in their country. The International Criminal Court issued a similar arrest warrant last year against Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. That's the news. Thank you for watching, and from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.